The path to mastery leads through the heart of adversity. Challenge is the raw material from which courage and strength are forged. Warriors are not defined by events. Warriors define them. Warriors conquer themselves before all else. Warriors are relentless in their service to others. Join us as we open our hearts and hone our minds to a razor's edge. It doesn't matter how slow you go, only that you do not stop. Your time is now. And now your host, Jason McKenzie.
Welcome to the next episode of the Mental Health Warriors podcast. How was that? You know, I do so many of these intros that I try to find new ways to do them, and I realized that one was absolutely pathetic. So I probably won't do that again. But hey, listen, before we get into this really interesting show, and I'm laughing, and I'll tell you about it in a minute, but I wanted to tell you about the Dad Edge Alliance. Okay, so it's a group of incredible men, 250 guys or so at the time of the recording of this podcast, and growing. And it is a bunch of guys who are actually kind and compassionate and caring, but kicking ass and holding each other accountable and improving their lives. And, you know, if you are a guy and you don't have an amazing group of men in your life, you are missing out. It is freaking unbelievable how much of a difference it makes, how much it changes you, how much it lifts you up, how much you learn, and how much more connected and compassionate you become, how you see that actually talking about the stuff that actually matters, like, oh, I'm going to say a dirty word here, guys, your emotions. You know, actually acknowledging that you have them and working through them and putting them to use as a weapon instead of a boat anchor around your neck. I mean, that's what actually having a group of men around you can do. So go take a look at the Good Dad Project, or the let me try that again. The gooddadproject.com/alliance. Because I babbled that so much, I'm obviously going to include the link in the show notes page. But in this group, man, there's, you know, call teams that get together and hold each other accountable every week. There's community calls. There's, you know, kind of themes for the month. There's tons of free content. There's free books. There's all kinds of stuff going on in this community. And it's literally $67 a month. And it's run by my amazing friend, Larry Hagner, who's just one of the most classy, top-notch guys you could ever meet and just really wants to make a positive difference in the world. So guys, if you're around a bunch of assholes, please get rid of them, or at least keep them and introduce some non-assholes in your life. It'll change everything, okay? So this episode of the podcast is with my buddy, Darcy, okay? Darcy Patrick. And I actually saw this guy talk at a Mo Mondays event, which is kind of like a thing in Ontario, or maybe it's not just in Ontario. Anyways, where, you know, people who are like not professional speakers can get up and talk. And so they have an event every month. And so anyways, I saw Darcy talk and he just friggin' blew me away. Holy shit. He tells this story of depression and, just there's so many powerful moments in there and how he's sort of overcoming it, but how crippling it was. And there's a few moments in his story where, oh my God, it's just heartbreaking. And he was in the shit for a long time, but he started to run. And he actually wrote a book called Why I Run. And he's just got this amazing story about running and how it not how some magical story where running helped him overcome depression, but because actually when he started running, it was actually like kind of almost a symptom or whatever, where he hated himself when he was running. But anyways, he's a really an incredible speaker, and he's got just such a cool story that I think a lot of people will relate to, which is one of just being in the absolute shits for so long, even after having a kid, and not, you know, that kid, that birth of his child, even that not being enough to snap him out of it and just being in just a terrible, terrible place. But then, you know, overcoming, working through, moving beyond, we never really move beyond, but moving through and then helping people. right? And I mean, we cover a lot of stuff in this episode, and I'm going to give you, we talk actually, it gets a little bit off topic at certain points. We actually talk about a myth that many men believe in when it comes to giving a post-vasectomy sperm sample. Okay, I believed in this myth too, so you're gonna have to listen to the episode to find out what that is. And I'd love to know if you too subscribe to this myth or did subscribe to it. All right, so listen, I wanted to say thank you to Darcy for doing the show. Thank you for running, motherfucker. It's amazing, and thanks for being such a great speaker, man. Because I spoke, thankfully, when we did that event, I spoke before you, and I feel kind of grateful about that because you came on and you absolutely crushed it, and I'm sure you've done it a million times since then. So thanks a lot, brother, and keep up the good work and keep on running. Hey, Darcy, welcome to the Mental Health Warriors podcast, my friend. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we were at a speaking event a couple of weeks ago, and I basically sat with my mouth hanging open listening to you speak. So, in other words, you have a great story and you're an incredible speaker. But you want to hear something interesting, actually, is I was just before we started this, you and I connected for the podcast today, I was talking to Kat, the other speaker. And I don't know, she was telling me that her talk had a really profound impact on you, actually, which I did not know. So the way you were able to pull yourself together there was, it made it even extra impressive, I would say.
Yeah, it was pretty neat because I had just lost my father about 2 weeks ago. I've been having like the hardest time grieving for him, and something she said right at the very end of her talk about letting go and trusting that everything was going to be okay, like just floored me, and I was, oh my God. And then I started crying, and goodness, we had that little low mingle break because I ended up going into the bathroom and bawling my eyes out in the bathroom stall for my dad. And then I was like, holy crap, I'm going to be up on the stage in like 10 minutes. I better get my shit together. So I went over and I like splashed some water on my face. I came out and yeah, and then it was go time, right? So I had to pull it together and talk.
Yeah, and you did a great job. You know, it's funny you talk about grief because I've talked about that with a couple different people today, and I talked about it yesterday actually at a speaking event. But I run a mastermind group for guys, and one of the guys was talking about his loss of his dad, and he was talking about he actually within a very short period of time lost his dad and then lost his daughter to a like some kind of I guess genetic disease, and that was 3 or 4 years ago, and he was talking about grief. And man, what an interesting journey that is. Like, it's for me, it's been 7 years since Cindy, my first wife, died, and it's grief and that journey. I don't really know if it ever ends, you know. And I don't know that it needs to end, or I'm not suggesting that, but every like I'll tell you something happened yesterday. So I'm giving this talk to some first responders and some counselors, and we're having this panel discussion at the end. And I don't know why I said this because it's not something I've thought about really. And it's not like I was trying to hide it. I've never felt a desire to say it, but I just said yesterday that, yeah, when she was sick, like really sick for so long, there was a lot of times where I wish she was dead. Without a doubt, you know, because I wanted my pain to end. I wanted her pain to end. I wanted her. I mean, I was scared of her trying to take the kids away from me. I didn't want her to scar the kids. And then when you think these things, you just have this so much fucking guilt about thinking them in the first place. So I'm saying this out loud yesterday, and I'm like, it's not that I felt guilty about it. That's not what it was. But for almost up until probably I was talking to Kat right before this call, I was feeling really shitty, you know, not shitty like guilty, like I was saying, just shitty, you know, because those are tough things to be having to deal with. And I guess by verbalizing it, it was like, I don't know, it made me think about that whole experience and feeling those thoughts and like that process of grief, because then what I need to do is like, just process it somehow, whatever the fuck that even means, you know, but like work through it. But so I guess my point is that sometimes it feels like it never ends, but there's always something good that comes out, maybe not right away, but for the most part, something good that eventually comes out of allowing yourself to feel the pain.
Yeah. And that was the key, right? It was like when I was going through depression, I talk in my talk about how I was acting all the time. And after my dad passed away, I was like, I, I felt like I couldn't grieve properly for him because I had done so much to better myself through learning how to fight depression and stuff. And I felt like, man, let myself fall backwards. What's it going to do to me, right? And when she had mentioned that about letting go and just trusting that things are going to be okay, I was like, you know what, I've got to let go. And I went through the same thing. My dad was lying in a hospital bed probably for about 3 years, uh, just basically like a skeleton, and suffering every day. And him passing was a good thing for him. But I used to sit there and I would sit with him and hold his hand, and I'd be like, "Why won't you just die? Like why? Why do you have to keep suffering like this for so long? Why won't you just go?" And then when he did, it's like I was taken back, and I'm like, "Oh my God!" Like he is finally gone, and it's so final. And yeah, grief is a weird thing, man, because I thought I had dealt with everything, with all my demons, learning how to fight the way I did with my depression, to fight my depression. And man, this is something that I've just never experienced before. The power of grief is ridiculous.
Yeah, I was talking to a grief expert on the podcast a while ago. I haven't released the episode yet, but she was telling me she has a practice where she helps people deal with grief, and she was saying that most of the people who come to see her have the thing that they are grieving happen at least 20 years ago.
Mm.
Yeah, so I mean, it's one of those things where you just need to allow yourself to go through it, and it'll. If I guess sometimes I think for a lot of people they don't even realize that they have to. I know I didn't. It was just like I didn't even know what grief was. I actually thought grief was something that weak people had to go through,
Sure.
while strong people took care of business.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking too, right? I'm sitting here going, I'm doing all these talks, I'm helping all these people. I'm above grief. Like seriously, I'm not. Why am I letting this even affect me, right? So I kind of put this mask on, and then every once in a while, there's a little chink in the armor, right, where it's like something happens, and you go, "Oh yeah, I can't talk to my dad. He's gone," right? And it's like, boom, wow, it's right in your face again, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So now that I mean, we'll go back into the whole backstory for sure because it's super powerful. But now that you're doing what you're doing now, and you've come so far, do you ever feel like, you know, it's incumbent on you to have your shit together to a level where you didn't before because you're up on stage talking about it? Like, do you ever feel like does it ever, I guess, create a sense of pressure for you?
Sometimes. I did a talk at Brock University.
Yeah.
A girl said to me right out of the, like, after I was done, she was like, "Do you still fight depression, or are you just completely cured? Do you still go to therapy? Like, what's the deal here, right?" And I was like, I felt what you're saying. I'm like, wow, should I be honest and say I'm just a hard ass motherfucker now and nothing ever bugs me? Or do I be
Hmm.
honest? And I was like, you know what? There's more strength in being honest than there is me saying that, you know, I I'm above all of this. So I told her, I said, no, I was going to therapy once a month, um, scaled it back that far. And then when my dad died, it hit me so hard and I didn't know how to deal with the grief that I was going once a week again. And it's kind of hard when you're doing these talks because you think that you're supposed to be teaching people something about how you got through everything. But at the same time, showing that you're human, I think, makes it even more impactful on those people to let them know that, you know what? Even the guy who's in front of us talking right now still has hard times because he's still a human.
Yeah, I agree. That's such an important. I mean, honestly, if you sometimes it's hard to incorporate, like to figure out how to incorporate that into a talk when you're giving to people, because you're right, you want to teach them a lesson. But I think that in the conversations, especially that happen afterwards, when you get off stage and you talk to people, that there's just such a huge opportunity. Like those are some of the most amazing conversations because you get up there and you've created this amazing space for people to be able to, like, to an audience, to be able to be open. And it would, the things, and I'm sure this happens to you all the time, the things people say to you afterwards are just mind-boggling sometimes, they're inspiring sometimes, but fundamentally they are authentic, and they form the basis of like a really powerful human connection that you form with each person you talk to. So that's, I think, like for me, that's what I actually love 100,000 times more than actually being up on stage talking. That's only for me a way to create the connection afterwards.
Yes, yeah. I do talks every once in a while for running rooms because they have lecturers come in and they talk about diet and they talk about all this other stuff, but they never draw on the mental issue, right? So I go to running rooms and I do my talk and then I run with them. So then I'll do like a 10K run or a 5K run with the running group people, and the conversations that start up while I'm actually running with them are unbelievable. And the one really sticks out in my mind the most because this one lady, she came to me at the beginning of the talk and wanted me, she had bought my book ahead of time and she wanted me to sign it. And then I signed it and made a little nice note. And then we went out on a run after I finished the talk, and she opened up and she was like, I don't feel good about myself anymore. I don't paint. She was an artist. I don't paint, and I've lost who I am, and I don't know how to find it, and I want to die. And she said she had like 2 young boys and a husband, and they have no idea of what she's going through. So as we ran, I talked to her and we talked about her negative emotions and her feelings and everything. But we built this great bond, and then she started messaging me on Facebook. And then I wanted her to paint again because she wasn't getting that you have to take care of yourself for everything else in your life comes together to be what it's supposed to be, right? That whole taking care of you first, the oxygen mask that goes on before the plane goes down, right? So I messaged her and I said, the 1-year anniversary is coming up for my book. I want you to paint me a cover for my next book, for my guided meditation book that I'm writing. And she was like, oh, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. There's no way I can do it. So I said, no, Liz, you can do it. And she did. And it was the most amazing painting. And since then, she started painting again. And she just got a job doing that cocktails for canvas thing. And it's like, holy smokes. But it's that what you're talking about is like you create that open conversation environment when you do these talks that afterwards you actually reach the people one-on-one. And that's where the magic happens.
Yeah, it sure does. What I was going to say too is I think like what you gave her there, I always say to people, like, it's amazing how far you can go when someone believes in you. And when you create the environment or the situation where somebody can be totally authentic with you and you can see their humanity, it's so easy for somebody else, like for me or for you, to see how much there is in that person to actually believe in, even if they can't see it themselves. So by you creating that space and then giving her the opportunity to speak her truth to you, and for you to be able to clearly see how much she had to offer, and then be able to give her an opportunity to offer it, like, come on, man. Is there much better of a gift that one person can give to another?
There isn't. There absolutely isn't. I mean, there's no money. I always measure success by how many people I managed to talk to personally. And that's like, with Liz, it was unbelievable.
Wow. So I think this is probably a good point to maybe head backwards in time a little bit, because your story was gripping, especially the part about your childhood. I mean, once you understand that and you hear you tell that story in your own voice, everything that happens afterwards becomes, not, and I want to say inevitable, but it becomes so clear about how you went from there, to then your teenage years and your young adulthood. And I'm so passionate about this for a couple of reasons. I mean, obviously as a father, I'm passionate about it, but so many guys I talk to don't understand the connection between their childhood and their lives right now. So they look at themselves and they're like, oh my God, I'm in so much pain. I have anxiety, I have depression, I feel worthless, I feel like a failure as a husband and a father and all of that stuff. And it's awful talking to them. And yeah, so you ask them about their childhood and they go, and then they'll tell you, they'll tell me often. And it's like, okay, like, holy shit. Are you willing to consider that there's a thread that runs between then and now? Like, I mean, and for a lot of guys, how they feel is, or at least the ones I talk to, the way they feel is, look, I felt like I had dealt with that because I just pushed it all down and tried to forget about it. That's one thing. And then the other one I hear sometimes is like, I know that's contributing to the way I feel right now, but I'm too scared to go back and, confront those demons basically. Right. So, I mean, maybe walk us through your childhood, because there was this one pivotal moment that just tore at my heartstrings, man. And you probably know which one I'm talking about, but I'm just really excited for the audience to hear it.
Cool. Yeah. When I was a little boy in grade school, I couldn't pronounce the letter R. So when I said my name, it came out as Darcy. And it brought great laughter from my classmates, and it brought, great humiliation. And I stopped talking in class. I stopped raising my hand to answer those questions that were being asked. And reading out loud was like the worst thing that could ever happen. And it would happen all the time. And I don't have enough time when I do my talk to talk about it. But what I would do when I was a kid was I would actually count how many kids were in the classroom and how many paragraphs there were before I had to read out loud. And I would practice that part over and over, that paragraph over and over and over again. And then when it came to my part where I had to read it, I would still screw it up because the anxiety that I built up in myself, plus, being terrified of the letter R, would just make it so I couldn't even read. And then the class would laugh over again. So, I mean, I stopped being myself. And the part you were talking about was we had to do a class project. And I was already so withdrawn and acting all the time that the class project was simply on what we wanted to be when we grew up. All my classmates, when you're kids, they all wanted to be the firefighter and the police officer, the doctor, the nurse, and I just wanted to be myself. And I remember, it's funny, I can still see the title page that I drew. And I stood in front of the class and I said, what I want to be most when I grow up is myself. And the teacher looked at me and she said, Darcy, is that really what you're going to talk about today? And I said, yeah. And she told me to sit down and she gave me a failing grade. And at that moment in my life, I knew that I could never really be myself, that the only way that I was ever going to survive was to do things for others, to seek their approval and hopefully find my own happiness. And, I grew up in a house that I don't talk about in my talk because, again, for Mo Mondays, there's only 10 minutes. But I had 6 older brothers. And my seeking of approval for everything I did in my life was a constant because I didn't want to fight with any of my brothers. I always wanted to make people happy. I was the youngest child of 7. And and then that grew and grew through high school. It only got worse, man, because high school is where we learn how to be adults. And when I got to high school, it was just, I would beat myself up every day. If people didn't like me, if I wasn't liked by the popular crowd, I was a loser. If I didn't have friends, I was a waste of flesh. And, I was ugly. No girls were ever going to like me. And I even withdrew further and further, right? I learned how to self-hate when I got into high school.
Let me interject there and say, like, I'm trying to imagine a kid doing a project at school and giving the most probably important and insightful answer that any other kid gave. And by having the courage to say, I just want to be myself. Imagine what a moment that could have been for a teacher to take that message from you and turn that into such a fucking powerful opportunity to teach the kids in a class the importance of living your truth, or just marching to the beat of your own drummer. Now, the problem is, I'm sure this teacher was not being herself or living the life that she, believes she was born to live. And so she instead of seizing that moment for the beautiful teaching opportunity it was, used it to just drive like a final nail in the coffin of your, of your self-worth, I guess. I mean, oh
Absolutely.
God.
And I mean, and the more I think about it, the now I think about it and I go like, you know what? Not only was it an opportunity, she should have let me talk some. Because if I was a teacher and I had a kid say that to me in my class, I would have let him do his presentation because I find out obviously there's something wrong with him if all he wants to be is himself. But she didn't even let me start my presentation because I had a good presentation, man. And she just cut me right off and like you said, put that nail right in the coffin.
Yeah. And I think it's such an important lesson for parents too, is that, you know, our kids are, and I'm sure you see this. I mean, but my kids are 12 and 13 right now. And the relationship we have with them, I think is wonderful. I'm really happy with it. But the amount of power that a parent has over a child to affect the way they view themselves, affect the way they view the world is so incredible. And it is so sacred. And the idea of somebody abusing that or not, I don't know. I mean, it's a tragedy. I look at my kids, like, for example, I think sometimes so my kids come home and they show me their work. I could say, there's a lot of things I could say. One of them is like, I'm so impressed with the amount of effort that you put in to create that. Or I could say, that's a fucking piece of shit. Those are my choices that I have. And the devastation that the latter one would cause, is just, I think about that quite a bit actually. And I just, how many people, how many adults treat that casually, in the lives of the kids they interact with.
Yeah, and I mean, when you want to instill positive behavior. So you praise, you praise, you praise, even if that dog they drew doesn't look anything like a dog. You say, wow, that is the most beautiful dog I've ever seen. And some kids don't get that. Some kids do not even have parents looking at whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so where were we? We were back. I think we were in high school at this
Yeah.
point, and yeah. So maybe take it from where we
Okay,
left
yeah.
off.
So then by the time I left high school, I mean, I had withdrawn into myself. I was pretty much an outsider to the world. At least I thought so. And I went to college for music, and music was always the one thing that I had that was self gratification, right? So I could play and I could control everything that came out of my bass guitar, right? And when I went to college, I was still trying to seek so much approval from everybody else, and it got worse because college was a very competitive place for musicians, and all my friends were in the jam rooms and they were learning to apply everything that they were being taught, right? And I was stuck out in the hallway by myself while some of my best friends were in these jam rooms, and I was like hating them because they weren't allowing me into their inner circle, right? So I sat there and I said, well, I'm going to practice everything I possibly can, memorize everything to impress and show these guys, right, that I deserve to be with them and not an outsider. And it never worked because my mind was just in such a bad place.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, you just reminded me. I'm curious about music just in general because I have zero, like, and I'm talking zero musical, like, I don't know if it's musical ability or whatever. I can't even hum a tune. But I remember this time talking about teachers in high school where I took grade 9 music and then I took grade 10 music and I ended up failing grade 10 music, but I was playing of course I wanted to play the drums like every kid, and there's only one set of drums in my high school. So I ended up playing the clarinet and I sucked so bad. And so for our final exam in grade 10, what we had to do is we had to record ourselves playing a song, and I mean, for just dating ourselves here, I had the double deck ghetto blaster, with the two tape decks. So I recorded myself playing Stairway to Heaven, and I got to school and I will be honest, I thought I had done a pretty good job. So I get to school there's like 25 kids in the class. And so the teacher takes my tape, he puts it on the stereo in the classroom. And basically from the moment the first note played, he just busted
Oh,
out
come on.
laughing. And so of course then the entire class busted out laughing. And Stairway to Heaven is not a short
No.
song, right? Like it. And so when the entire classroom is like basically falling out of their chairs laughing at the effort you put in, it actually seems like it's about 5 times longer. So, and then he failed me on top of that. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think that did much for my feelings of, my sense of self,
Well,
but I tell it now. It was kind of a funny story, but I'm sure you could have handled it a little
yeah,
differently.
absolutely. Yeah. So yeah,
So, anyways, my question was actually about music. So have you always had like a musical, like an affinity for music? Like, was it easy for you, or was it challenging, and you were just so passionate about it you kind of slogged through it anyways? Like, how did that work for you?
music for me started out quite honestly. What happened was my best friend who lived across the street from me started to play guitar, and so when I would go to his house after school to play with him, his mom would be like, "No, Mark has to practice his guitar for an hour every day after school, so don't come here until 4 o'clock." And I was like, "Okay." So I went home and I was mopey, and my mom was like, "We have a guitar in the closet. Maybe if you learn how to play guitar, you can practice." And I was like, "Wow, this is awesome." So I started playing music that way. And then, you know what? Because I wasn't getting the outside gratification and I was withdrawn into myself so much, I ended up picking up bass guitar because me and Mark, put together this awesome band that we were going to be famous in. And I started playing, and my work ethic is so ridiculously strong in my life that when I do something, man, I'm all in or I just don't do it. So I started playing my bass and it became an obsession. I mean, when I wasn't at when I wasn't practicing every single day, I would wake up in the middle of the night and feel guilty for not playing my instrument. And I would sit in bed at 3 o'clock in the morning when I was 14 years old, practicing scales and practicing things in the dark with just my bass, no amplifier, just trying desperately to master it, everything I could possibly do, right? And then it turned into like by the time I got into high school, I did my first gig when I was 14 years old, playing in this horrible country band, and I discovered I could make money from it. And then when high school came, it was like I could hang out with other musicians that were kind of outsiders at the same time. So I found comfort in the company that I was keeping as a musician. And then when I got out of college, man, it just turned into the worst thing that could ever happen to me. I loved playing, but it disappeared quickly because what happened was I chose to use my musical ability as a vehicle to get people to like me. So I would sub for other bands. I would learn like 50 tunes in like 2 days, 3 days, and then gig with them. There was no gig that I would not turn down, whether it be country music, jazz, hard rock, like you name it. I've played it all because I am always looking to make somebody else like me. And, it was such an empty career, and I did it for 28 years of my life. And I saw no success in it. I mean, in my talk, I was gigging 4 nights a week. I was even teaching out of my house, like 50 students out of my house, and holding down a full-time job in a music store. And music was never a passion to me. It was always hard-nosed work and get it done, make the money, and make as many people happy as you possibly can.
Wow, that's really interesting. That guy that actually played at Mo Mondays when we talked, he was really good, eh?
He was
I was
very good.
really impressed with him.
He had an unbelievable voice, and I told him when I walked up on the stage, I was like, "Man, you got a killer voice for such a young." I was like, "Wow."
Yeah. So, anyways, back to where we were. So, at this point, would you say so? You're kind of in college. You're not, interacting with the other guys who are playing music. Are you in the grips of, or maybe you have been for a while at this point, but I guess when did you identify, or when do you identify that depression really took a massive hold over your
Um,
life?
I realized that um, when I started running, when I made the bet at work um, to lose the weight and started running, and I realized that I had something was wrong with me when I'm, doing something that everybody talks about that they enjoy so much and they love so much, and I'm like running these extreme distances and just going over the bad stuff in my mind over and over and over again. You know, shit that happened to me when I was a little kid up till, the time I was. So I kind of knew that I had some pretty bad problems and that I was sinking into a pretty deep place. But that day when I stopped um, and I was going to jump off the overpass, I think was when I was like, you know what? You're pretty dark, man. You got to get some help. But then I would just mask it and act, you know, and yeah, that would probably be, when I started to run, I really realized that I had some demons and that I was suppressing a lot of things, and depression would, had its hold on me.
So one thing that's interesting, I think, about your story is that it's almost counterintuitive in a way because I think for a few reasons. One is that you managed to force yourself to do this crazy amount of running when you were in dealing with such severe depression, first of all. And I think another thing that people typically think, I mean, you hear it all the time, right? Is that one of the best antidotes for, depression or mental health issues is exercise. But in a way, that exercise was really almost facilitating your ability to have the time and space to have these super dark thoughts. Because as you were saying when you gave that talk, like those were the times that you would just well, you just said it now too, would just go over and over in your mind. So, I mean, have you, I guess, how do you, what are your thoughts about that? And I mean, have you talked to other people that have done something similar? Because I was quite
Oh yeah,
surprised to hear you
I
say
had
that.
a guy who came into the store who had heard a radio interview with me and came in to purchase my book, and he was like, "Dude, I am the same as you. When I run, I do exactly what you did. I would grow my depression. I would think about all that stuff. I was talking with a girl came over to my house yesterday, a friend of the family who is suffering. She's like, it's so sad. She's like 20. She's like in university, and her depression is consuming her. And she was telling me how when she is out with friends and things, that she'll leave early because she wants to get home to worry about all the bad things in her life. And that's kind of, I took that time when I was running by myself, when I was alone, that everybody else at that, when they're doing physical exercise, is like, oh, this is the greatest thing in my life. I get to hang out and do my own thing and truly be with myself. But I mean, what happens when yourself is just a bad person at the time, right? A dark person that hates everything and thinks that the world's came down on him and he's never deserved anything good in his life, right? So when you're alone, uh, it's pretty bad. Sometimes people don't sleep. I mean, I never slept a lot, but I used that alone time to run. And it was, yeah, I know it's kind of very counterintuitive because, like you say, man, a lot of people are like, I can't wait to run. It makes me feel so good. Well, it does now for me, but it didn't then.
And now, what about I mean, one of the, obviously the side effects of dealing with depression like that is a lack of energy. So
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, every
where did
morning
that
when my alarm
come
went off,
from?
it was like,
Did you have to fight your way through
there's
that, I
no way
guess?
I'm getting out of bed. But it's like I said, it's weird how my work ethic, right? Like when my work ethic was, I'm going to learn how to play bass, right? I'm going to give it everything that I have. And then when my work ethic was switched
Mhm.
to running and losing that weight, it became that is what I'm doing, and I'm doing it every morning, and nothing is going to stop me. So I'm going to get up. I'm going to run this 14K run before work, and I don't care. I'm thinking about every bad thing I possibly can while I do it, and I'm going to not miss single thing.
It's super interesting. So you mentioned that you got to the point where you were running over an overpass and you actually stopped and thought about jumping. Like what's going through one of the things that's always been interesting to me is what people are thinking in those moments because for a bunch of reasons. I mean, one of them is you hear this dumb throwaway line that, oh, suicide is the most selfish thing you can do from people who have never maybe experienced it. And for me, personally, I find it interesting because I've often wondered what went through my first wife's mind in those final moments and when she decided to make that decision. And, I mean, I've said this a bunch of times. I mean, I've reconciled myself with the idea that I'll never know that. It's impossible for me to know that. But regardless, it's always interesting to me to hear in their people's own words what was actually going on in their mind at
Yeah.
that time.
I mean, right at that moment, I was like, I want to make this stop. I can't take this pain anymore. And I want to be free. And the only way for me to finish and get this whole thing over with is to jump off this bridge. And as I ran up it, I got to the perfect spot to the very middle of it. And I put my hands on the railing and I was like, one, two, and then I just turned and I ran. And I don't know why I ran away. People always ask me, what were you thinking? Like when you turned and left and not jumped. Like what was going through your mind when you decided not to jump? And I'm like, I'm a failure. And and it was just weird, man. It was like I'm running down that overpass and I'm thinking, what a loser you are. Like another thing that you just can't do in life.
So even the decision to stay alive in your mind was another indication that you're a failure. Man, there was no
No,
winning for you.
no, there's no winning. There's no winning at all.
So after that, I remember. So after that, if I remember the chronology right, wasn't it the next day when you then met
It was
your
that day.
adoptive son for the first time?
Yeah, it was that day. It was
Oh, that day.
amazing. Like 8 hours later, I'm sitting in, I'm at work. I'm working on a guitar, and the phone rings, and it's Fax Family Children's Services, and they're like, Darcy Patrick. Like, yeah, and they're like, we have a little boy for you to see today. And I was like, oh my God, this can't be happening. And then I was literally hanging up the phone, and my adoption worker walked in the door. And she goes, you have to go and pick up Sherry. We have a little boy for you to see. I said, yeah, I just got off the phone. And it was like 8 hours, 8 hours after, I was standing on the overpass to kill myself. All of a sudden, I'm like meeting my son for the first time. And it was unbelievable. Like it was literally, they brought him into the room and the lady was holding him and I was sitting on the couch, and as soon as our eyes met, his hands just automatically went right out for me to hold him. And it's like he was waiting for me or something. It was unbelievable. And I put my hands out and I held him, and he was like 11, just shy of 11 months old. And it was instant bondage. Like it was just, this is my son. And it was so funny because the social worker was like, go home and think about it overnight and let me know what you think. And I'm like, what are you talking about? This is my son, man. He's my son. I'm not going anywhere without him. And it was the August long weekend. And that was the Tuesday um, that I met him. And he moved into our house on the Thursday.
Wow. So one thing I'm curious about is actually just the adoption process, because I have in my mind that it's like this torturous process that takes forever.
Yeah.
I'm like, is that what it's actually like?
Yeah, it takes forever. And I mean, and we went through a lot, like we did artificial insemination probably 6 times, just failing and not being able to get pregnant. And the guilt that I had for that because of being sterile was just consuming. And then when we decided to do the adoption thing. We wanted to do it like through Family Children Services, because everybody, when you hear people adopting, they're adopting from out of the country, they're doing it in a private adoption setting. And me and my wife were like, no, 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 if we're going to do this, we want to help someone that's like right there in our community. A child that's in Canada that is, here. So we went to FACS, and I mean, it was home studies and parenting classes and adoption support groups, and all this is going on while all of our friends are getting pregnant and having kids. So I'm holding other people's children, and pretending that I'm extremely happy. Meanwhile, I'm like jealous as all hell and hateful. How come everybody we know is getting pregnant and having children, and we've done nothing but good in our entire lives and can't have a child? It was
When we
that whole
tried to get
experience was
pregnant with
just so
our first
defeating.
daughter, we tried for about a year, I would say. And I'll tell you, man, I'm sure you just said you experienced it, but it's amazing when you are trying and you can't. What an emotional roller coaster that is. But, I guess I forget the phenomenon that the human mind goes through, but it's like all of a sudden, every fucking commercial is for diapers. Every person we know is getting pregnant. And it's like every time one of these things happens, it's just like this reinforcement that we are not able to do what, everybody else is doing. And I know for my wife, it was because my first wife, it was because she didn't ovulate properly. So we ended up having to take these drugs or whatever, and they worked. But that I can just imagine what it must have been like for you finding out you're sterile, because I know for her, the ability to conceive is just so intrinsically part of what it means to be a woman. And her inability to do that, man, she felt like a fucking failure, despite the fact that I didn't obviously feel that way about her, but that's beside that. Honestly, that's beside the point. So, I mean, for you, it's obviously the ability to conceive is not just a fundamental aspect. It's a fundamental aspect of being human. So for you, a guy who is already dealing with some pretty severe mental health issues, to find out that you are sterile, fuck, that must have been, how devastating was
the way
that?
it
I can't even
happened was
imagine.
like so weird, because I was having like bad prostate problems. And so I just went to my family doctor one day, and I was like, is this going to stop me from having kids? And he was like, well, maybe we should, get a sample and see what's going on. So I went, you know, into the room, and I was completely sterile. And we went to see the specialist in Toronto. And so I'm waiting for this specialist for my appointment. And this nurse comes over, and she goes, do you mind if we involve you in this study that we're doing for this weird mutated gene of cystic fibrosis? She was finding that a lot of males that are sterile have this weird gene. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. Take some blood. Who cares? I mean, I'm going to get tons taken today anyways, right? And then, 2 days later, I find out that I have this weird mutated gene of cystic fibrosis, man. And then my mom tells me that, oh, yeah, they thought you had cystic fibrosis when you were born. They actually brought you to Sick Kids Hospital. So I was like, what the heck? And then the humiliation that happened after that was like beyond anything. I mean, I was driving to Toronto. Like I had 2 operations done to try and clear up the problem. And after the operations, I would drive to Toronto to jerk off into a cup, and that was humiliating enough to drive, and then there was none of the operations worked. So yeah, it just crushed me beyond crushing. And then the doctor's appointments at the CF place, where I got like 5 doctors poking and prodding me and asking me all these weird questions and taking all these weird tests, and and it still bugs me. I still have to go every year and get blood tests and do lung capacity tests and things. It was pretty crippling.
Wow. One thing I will say on a lighter note, and I don't know if you experience this, and I'm really curious to know how many other men experience this, but after the birth of our second daughter, I got a vasectomy, and so as part of the vasectomy, right, you have to
Yeah.
jerk off into a test, like into one of those little cups. And I actually believed, and I swear to God, I believe this, that when I saw the cup, I'm like, I don't actually think this is going to be enough to hold my load. And I was so
Yeah.
disappointed. It was like a sneeze in there, man. Like
Yeah,
it
I mean,
was,
and it was funny. The
yeah.
last time I
Anyways,
went, I got stuck in traffic, and this is a weird story because they only have so much time, so they have like a whole bunch of people go and do that, right? So I'm like stuck in traffic, and trying to get into Toronto to the hospital, and I'm telling the lady I'm on my old Nokia cell phone, right? And I'm like, I'm late. I'm not going to be able to make it. She's like, just try and make it. Try and make it. So I like get up there and I take the elevator and I basically run to the room and she like just hands me the paper bag and she goes, "Hurry up, you have 2 minutes." And I sat down and I grabbed
no pressure.
this fucking porn bag and I opened it up. I opened it up and I thought to myself, I'm done. I'm finished. This is it. Like what does it come to when I have like this 22-year-old nurse telling me to hurry up? I have 2 minutes to give this sample, right? I'm like, man, I'm just so defeated. So I just, you know what? I got up and I walked out and I handed her back the bag. And she was like, "You're done already?" And I'm like, you know what? I give up. And I just left.
Oh man, I was hoping for this heroic story
No,
where
no,
you're
no,
like
no, no. I
the
just,
clock
I just
ticking
gave up.
down.
Yeah, I got off there.
Okay. I don't know how you
Yeah.
got us sidetracked on this subject, but let's get back. so, anyways, I remember when you were giving your talk, you said something really powerful about that moment or those
Yeah.
moments after you met your son. Like you felt this magical connection. But if I
Changed.
remember correctly, you also said like it basically changed nothing for you about how you felt about yourself.
Yeah, it changed nothing. I mean, because um, now I had a son to look after. So now it was like, now I have to be that perfect father. I had to be that perfect husband, right? No one could now find out about my severe emotional state that I was in, right? And my depression had to be hid. I mean, there's no way that I could ever, now that I was, you know, a father, there's no
So
way
how do you
that
deal with it? Like what,
anyone could ever
how
find
did
out
you
about it.
hide it?
Yeah, I ran, man. I kept running. I kept running and I kept just beating myself up. And no matter what I did, I just said to you know what? I'm just never going to be myself. I'm just going to smile no matter how bad and how much I want to break down and just leave. I like to call it disappearing. I used to call it all the time. No matter how much I want to disappear, I'm going to fight and I'm just going to get through every single day acting as best as I possibly can.
So we're here talking today, and I watched you give a talk that was incredibly powerful. So something happened between now and then, or then and now, that triggered a profound transformation in your life. So I don't know if you had like a rock bottom moment, but how did you arrive at the point where either you realized you needed some kind of help or needed to do something differently, or somebody else maybe sat you down and helped you see that?
Yeah, when our music store got bought by Long and McQuaid, my workload like literally quadrupled. I became the assistant manager of the store. I mean, before my job was like to fix guitars and amplifiers and maybe sell some stuff every once in a while. And then all of a sudden, it was like I was staging displays, um, ordering product, shipping and receiving, doing guitar repairs, doing the scheduling of all of a sudden we had like 6 employees compared to two that we had before. And and it was like everything just came crashing down on me all at once. And that's when I broke and I was crying constantly. I mean, whenever I had a chance to be alone, if I was downstairs in my office playing my bass, I was crying. I drink on gigs, and booze is a depressant, so it would all of a sudden, it's like in between sets, I'm hiding out in my car crying in between sets, right? When I was at work, when no one was in my office, I'd close the door and I would just be a mess. I'd be crying. And the one guy that works with me at the music store, the drum guy, Nelson, I'd known him since college, so he knows me pretty well. And he was seeing exactly what I was going through, my downward dissension, that I couldn't act anymore, that, you know, the mask was being pulled away and I could see me. And the one day I was like, you know what, this is it. I'm done. Something happened at work, you know, like probably got like a shipment of like 30 boxes in or something like that. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm finished. And I walked out the back door of the store and I was like, I hit the sidewalk. And when I hit the sidewalk, I was pretty much convinced of what my fate was, I knew where I was walking to. And when I got there, I was jumping. And again, I took a step and I don't know what stopped me. And I turned around and I just walked right back into work. And when I walked into work, I walked into my office and the door closed right behind me. And I turned around and there was my friend Nelson standing there. And he was just like, dude, you're done. He said, you're finished. You're not leaving this room until you make a call for help. You're not working on another guitar. It's me and you. So either make a call right now. That's your only choice. You know, I looked down at the ground and I thought to myself, well, it's not my only choice, dude, because I can make the call right now and act like I'm going to go. And then I'm still going to go home and kill myself tonight. But, you know, I went over and I Googled depression therapists in St. Catharines. And I just read through all the profiles. And as I was reading through the profiles, I found this lady whose profile like just hit me. And I clicked on it and I saw her picture and I was like, I know this sounds weird, man, but I looked at her picture and I was like, this lady's going to save my life. And I called the number and, you know, she answered the phone and I said, I need help and I need it now. I can't wait a week. And she said, how's tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.? And I said, I'm there. And, you know, I walked in and when I was walking there, I thought to myself, you know, she's not going to do anything for me. Nothing that she's going to teach me is ever going to help me. But I walked in and when I sat down, I took a deep breath and I looked at her and I said, you know what? Game on. And I told her everything. I was like, I thought to myself, you're a therapist. You've heard everything. You've seen everything. You're here to help me. I'm giving you everything that I got. And I told her everything about myself, how much I wanted to die, how much I wanted to kill myself, disappear, how much of a failure I was, and everything. And she just like looked at me and she smiled and she said, you know what, Darcy? You're the furthest thing from a failure. She goes, just showing up here today proves that you're not a failure. And that was the turning point.
Did you, when she said that to you, did you believe, like, what was the impact of her saying that to you at that moment in time?
Yeah, I mean, I believe for the first time, when I listened to her talking to me and she was telling me about negative emotion, you know, and how we're not programmed to deal with it properly, and how I was putting all my emotion into this barrel and it was filled and it was overflowing. You know, I was listening to her and I was like, you know what, you're totally right. And if you're right about everything that you're telling me right now, chances are you're probably going to be able to help me. You know, and I was and I listened to her and I was pretty impressed. I was like, wow, you know what? I think she's going to be able to do something for me. And man, it worked.
So so you're at that moment, you know, she's teaching you some new tools, I guess. Like, tell us what that process of climbing out of that hole looked like over the first, you know, X amount of months or whatever. Like what kind of work were you doing? How long was it before were able to see something resembling light? You know, just, I don't know, maybe some more details about the journey at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we started with writing because, I was able to express myself, and she always gave me homework. She clicked in really quick with me that I had a really strong work ethic and that I liked to work on things, and that homework was like a huge thing for me, right? And a lot of people don't get what therapy is about, but a lot of the work that gets done with therapy happens outside of the room, right? Like they teach you the stuff, and then you have to go home and you have to apply it. And I remember she gave, and I forget the name of the book because it sucked, but she told me you should buy this book, and we're going to start doing like thought records and journal entries where you're just writing out everything you feel, just getting it out on paper. And I remember that book that she gave me. I started reading it, and I went back to her with the book, and I said, "This book is just filled with medical mumbo jumbo bullcrap that I don't want to identify with, that I don't have time for. I want to work on stuff that's going to make me better. Can we please just, I don't want to learn about medications. I don't want to learn about what Sigmund Freud said. I don't want to learn any of this stuff. Can you just teach me how to make my life better?" And she was like, "Yeah, we can do that." And I remember the one exercise, it was an exercise on honesty and being honest with your actual thoughts, right? And writing them out and not being afraid of what you wrote, right? Because sometimes we have really bad shit in our heads, and just thinking makes us feel bad. Never mind putting it out on paper, right? And I looked at her, and I looked down at the paper. I looked at her, and I looked down at the paper, and she said to me, she goes, "You have to write honestly, or this will not work." And I took a deep breath, and I wrote. And at that moment, I was like, this therapy is going to work. And from there on, I was going like, sometimes I'd be going like 2 times a week. My therapist was great because I would like have a time scheduled a week after, but I would call her and say, "You know what, I have to see you tomorrow," and she'd take me. Um, so I was handing in this stuff. I was going to see her 2 times a week sometimes. And I'm like, just the writing thing just took off. And I was like, I am able to write out all my feelings, and it's actually freeing me. And I'm able to prove all this stuff wrong that I was thinking, right? Because of the way she was teaching me to prove my negative thinking wrong. And I was handing it in. And, the one day she just looked at me and she said, "You know what?" She goes, "You're an incredible writer. And the way you are expressing yourself is beyond anything I've ever seen." She said, "You have to write a book. You have to write a book." And I was like, there's no way I will ever be able to write a book. This is way too personal for me. Um, and I woke up the one day and I was going for a run, and I was like, all of a sudden, I was looking at like every tree that was on a street, and it was the springtime, and there was cherry trees, right? So they had these bright pink cherry blossoms. And I'm running down the street and I'm looking and I'm going, every tree is different, but they're all the same. And how many shades of pink and red can I count? And I'm running and I'm thinking, I got past the trees and I turned this one corner. And I thought to myself, holy shit, I'm not hating who I am anymore. I'm actually enjoying my time running. And this is an experience that I had never experienced before. And that's when I was like, Jesus, all of this therapy is actually working. I am changing who I am. I am changing my thought process. And I'm doing it in a way that meant, because I always thought I was stupid because of what happened to me in school and everything. And I never answered questions, and I kind of always had bad grades. I was like, holy crap, I am a writer. Like, this is the most bizarre thing that's ever happened to me. And then it just took off. Then it was like uh, somebody opened the gate to a 100-meter dash and stopped running yet.
So I'm I'm trying to imagine after all that time and telling yourself all of these stories about yourself and all of these holding all these beliefs, what was it like to finally realize that, holy fuck, maybe I'm not stupid, or I am a writer, or there is hope?
Yeah, it was like I don't know what to say, but like a bomb going off, where I was like, this is the most amazing thing. Like I was like, hold on, this is what happiness is. This is what we're here for. To be happy. This is what it feels like, because this is pretty incredible. And I mean, after that, it was the most bizarre thing, because then all the pieces just came together uh, in such a magical way. My friend that I had mentioned earlier, who I'm still best friends with, friends since we were like 5 years old. I came out and I told him, I said, Mark, I've been going to therapy for depression. And he was like, what? And I said, yeah. I said, not only that, but man, I'm writing a book. And he was like, you're crazy. Writing a book? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, send me some chapters. So the way things come together sometimes in life is just unbelievable, when it's real, when it's meant to be, and when you have passion. And I sent him those chapters, and he read them, and he said, I'm going to send them to my uncle's brother. And I'm like, why would you send anything to your uncle's brother? And I knew Mark's uncle's brother since I was a little kid, right? He goes, dude, he's an editor. And I was like, what? So he sent my 2 chapters off, and within 2 hours, I received an email from his uncle's brother, Patrick. And he was like, Darcy, no one has ever written a book like this on depression. You have to keep writing, and I will edit your book pro bono from beginning to end. And I was like, holy smokes. Now I'm in. I'm in 100%. Like it just got real quick.
Just got
And,
real.
I started writing, and it turned into this back and forth where it was like, I'd send him 2 chapters, he'd send me 2 chapters back. And then we were just ping ponging back and forth, because an editor does more than just dot your I's and check your spelling, right? So he was making me elaborate on certain things. And then we got finished. And, we argued over how the chapters should flow and stuff. But the entire experience was just like unbelievably surreal. And then, I just always crack it up to this weird work ethic, because then when it was done, I tried to get it published and no one would even look at me. And I looked over at my wall, and I have like a whole bunch of basses that I've collected over the years. And I just looked at my basses and my bass amp, and I was like, you know what? You're going. And I, sold off almost all my musical equipment that I've had forever, and self-published my book. And what happened after that is just, I still can't even believe what's happened, because like if you would have told me, I could barely, I could barely read out loud when I was a kid, and now I'm just like standing in front of people and doing public speaking events, and even reading out of my book at some when when I'm given the opportunity. Um, it's like I'm living my life, man. It's like the most incredible thing that's ever happened to me. At 45, I'm living my life.
That is amazing. Hey, so what was the significance, I guess, of getting rid of your musical instruments?
Um, the money to self-publish. I mean, I was like, you know what? This chapter of my life is done. I still have like choice basses that I'll never get rid of, because they're unique and special to me. But that chapter of my life was done. I'm done. I'm done playing music for other people, because I'm living life for myself now. Now I play, but I play for me. So I'll sit down And I got about probably 2.5 hours worth of like Beatles songs and George Harrison songs and Cat Stevens tunes that I've made chord melodies for on my bass. I play for myself now when it comes to music, and I wish I would have discovered that when I was in my 20s. But I'm loving playing music now, and I just tossed away that old me completely when I sold off all my bass gear, and it facilitated what's happening now, which makes it even cooler, right?
Well, that's a great segue into why don't you tell us more about what's happening right now,
Yeah,
brother?
man. So now I am doing public speaking, and it's funny. The first time I did a public speaking event, a guy I went to college with had purchased my book, and he works for this place called Gateway, which is like a community outreach center that finds housing and jobs for mentally handicapped people and physically handicapped people. And they were having their annual awards ceremony. And he came into the store and goes, Darcy, do you want to be the keynote speaker for our annual thing, right? I'm like, yes, of course I do. And he's like, really? And I'm like, yeah, sign me up. And I've never done anything in my entire life, like no public speaking ever, right? And I come home and I tell my wife, I go, yeah, I just took my first public speaking engagement. And she's like, are you nuts? You've never done this? And I'm like, oh, yeah, but I've never written a book before. And I did that. I'm doing this, right? And I sat down and I typed out this story and printed it off. And I went up to the podium that day and I was shaken and I was nervous and I was stumbling over my words because I was reading off a page. And I went to flip the first page and I looked up at the audience and they were all sitting on the edge of their seat, listening to every single word I was saying. And I was like, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is it. And I took that page and I flipped it over top of the other pages and I grabbed the mic off the little mic stand and I just started talking and I just started telling my story. Um, and when it finished, I got like a standing ovation, and the chairman of the board, this nice old lady, was sitting beside me. And when I finished reading the last word out of my book that I like to read, the one chapter, the one little excerpt I like to read, she looked at me and she was like, "Holy shit, that's the most powerful thing I've ever heard in my life." And I was like, "Wow." Since then, I mean, it's gone ridiculous. The amount of people that are coming into my place of work now to talk to me about their mental health and their struggles and to purchase my book. I mean, I got people coming in, teenagers to guys that are in their 70s. I could tell you stories. I had this one guy come in and he acted like he wanted to rent lights for his band. So I took him over to the lighting department and I started hooking up lights and he was just looking at me and tears started coming down his face. And he said, Darcy, I'm not here to rent lights. I'm here to talk to you about my depression. And I looked at him and I said, well, let's go into my office. And he talked to me for about a half hour. And this is happening like all the time. And it's like my life has changed so dramatically from what it used to be. I mean, it's silly. I've sold now just out of my hand, I've sold like 2,000 books. Not including like not even including doing all these like indigos and online sales and stuff like that. People are just flocking into the store because I'm just a normal guy. And when I talk to them, the emotion that I convey to them, they know what it's like and they want to get help. And I'm trying to do it. I'm trying to help as many people as I can because you know what? I struggled for so long and I came out the other side and I keep thinking, you know what? If that dumb Darcy turned into this guy because he finally decided to be himself, then those people are just as smart as me because we're all just human beings. And we can all accomplish like humongously great things. There's no difference between the professional athlete that just won the Super Bowl and you and me. we're all just human beings, right? And it's just the time and the dedication that is put in by each person to better themselves is what makes people who they are, right? And
Oh, I just want to jump in there and say I totally agree with you. And what I have found is that the more people I talk to and the more people I serve by, telling my story, and, even people who I help find their own power to tell their own story or their own courage, what I have found for me is I used to be quite an arrogant fuck when I was younger, and really that arrogance was masking a whole bunch of insecurity. But what I have found is that, and people have actually asked me this, what it's like to be able to connect with people and to be able to help them and to be able to get them to share their stories and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, it has made me the most humble person. I like the most humble version of myself I have ever been, because I recognize exactly what you just said. And it is so important that, like, literally, if I can do this, so can you. Like, my, I was in a pretty dark place at times, man. Like, I never thought I was going to be able to stop drinking. I never, all these things have happened. And I felt pretty fucking helpless at times. And to realize that I can actually make a positive contribution in the world just drives home the point that so can everybody else. And when you recognize that everybody else can do it, it is so beautifully humbling.
oh yeah, and it's amazing how and being humble, and being humble and being I always think of it, being humble is being able to listen to others, and being that person that listens to people is like the most important thing, because we all, like you were saying, um, when we're stuck in our own arrogance and in our own traps, in our own way of hiding what's really going on in our minds, we stop listening and just start thinking everything that we do is always right. And being that sounding board and opening up, like we were saying earlier, about when you do the talk and you give that environment to people, how much it means to watch it grow. And it's so rewarding and so successful. Like, I'll do it sometimes. I'll do a book signing, and you know and I'll sell like 2 books at it. And then I'll come home and I'll think to myself, man, I only sold 2 books today. What a disaster. And then my wife will look at me and go, yeah, but Darcy, you sold 2 books to 2 people who are reading it's going to change their way that they live their life. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? That's huge. That's success. Even if it's that one person that we can meet, we can interact with, and we can get them to tell their story to us, and then in doing so, they realize that, you know what? I'm not alone. And once you know you're not alone, man, the world just opens up, doesn't it?
Yeah, my daughter did. So she did this art show, and she went and she did her watercolor. She hasn't had any training, but she just loves watercoloring, and she's created just such beautiful work. She's 12 years old, and there was this like festival around the corner from our house. So she rented a booth and sold her artwork. And I think as a kid, she was happy when people sold her art. I think she sold 18 paintings and, made a profit of like $70. But I was explaining to her just what you were saying, or just what your wife said to you, was like, you need to understand what it means when somebody buys your painting, because what they're like, think about the whole process. They are taking the money that they worked hard to earn. They are looking at your art. It is connecting with them, just like your book is connecting with the people that buy it. And then they're making the decision to give you their money, and they're taking this and they're going to go. Some of them told her, like, I'm going to put this up in my house, like their sacred place, their safe place. They want to take what you created and hang it on the wall of the place in the world that's the most important to them. Like, it's kind of a big deal, like, so Jesus, let's celebrate that. And it's the same thing with your book, man. Like or my book too, anybody, like it's every single one changes something for somebody.
Oh, absolutely. And that's like you're saying, like anytime that you can influence somebody in their life to make a change, man, that's success. I used to think of success as so many different other things. And now it's just so simple that, like, you know, if if I can strike up a conversation with some guy or some woman and reach them in any way, that's the greatest gift that any of us can give to each other. And it's not money, it's not a fancy car, it's not a fancy house. It's human interaction, and that's what builds strong relationships, right? It's unbelievable. And
Oh, totally.
yeah.
All right, brother. Well, listen, man, I could talk
Yes.
to you for a long, long time, and I'm sure this will not be the last time that we speak to one another
Yeah.
for sure. So, but for the audience who is interested in finding out more about you and more about the work you're doing, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Best way to get in touch with me to find out about all that is to go. I have a website, darcypatrick.com. Look me up on Facebook. I have an author page as well. I write like weekly blogs. And that's, you can find everything else through those places, my website or the Facebook thing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Mental Health Warriors podcast, brother. I really enjoyed this conversation. And like I said, I'm sure it won't be the last.
Yeah, man. No, I enjoyed it. This was incredible. Awesome.
Okay. Take care.
You too.
Run, Darcy, run. Man, thanks for the conversation. And yeah, thanks. I'm glad we met. I'm glad we crossed paths, and I'm glad you're doing the work you're doing, buddy. So, and I'm going to end this podcast. You know what? I'm not going to end this podcast the way I end every fucking podcast. Okay? I'm not going to do that because I feel like I've said it so many times. I want to say something else, but I actually don't really have anything to say right now. So I think what I'm going to say instead is I had this sushi yesterday, and it was super, super good. And I realized something, that I'm actually pretty damn good now at eating with chopsticks. And that was something that I never actually thought was possible. Like, you should have seen me, man, when I was a little younger, trying to eat with chopsticks, like looked like I had like no motor control whatsoever of my hands. But now I am not too bad at eating with chopsticks. I feel I can go and I actually can wield great control over them. And the reason I'm telling you that story is because for those of you who, chopsticks are a nice metaphor for life, aren't they? So keep on practicing, baby steps, incremental progress, and before you know it, your life will be just like the way I eat chopsticks, or I eat with chopsticks, or something. I don't know if that made any sense, but anyways, I'm happy I can eat with chopsticks, and it came from trying, and finally getting it. And also looking like a freaking idiot many, many times, like, dropping my sushi roll into the soy sauce and wasabi because I wasn't holding my chopsticks right, and then it splashing all over the place, or tearing my sushi roll apart, or actually stabbing the sushi like a freaking 3-year-old with the chopsticks. I've done it all. But now I wield the chopsticks not like a master, but like a seasoned apprentice. There's a message in there for you. I will let you figure out what that is. And we will see you on the next episode of the Mental Health Warriors podcast. And it's not going to be called the Mental Health Warriors podcast for much longer, so stay tuned.